Welcome, and thank you to all who are able to join us for this special live broadcast. My name is Chloe Corcoran, and I'm the Senior Associate Director of Constituent Engagement for the West Coast for Emory University. I also happen to be a very out and proud transgender woman. This presentation is part of our ongoing digital learning program sponsored by the Emory Alumni Association. While we are physically distancing to protect each other, Emory is deepening our digital engagement to support social connection with our students, faculty, staff, parents, donors, and friends. Today, we are hosting a conversation on LGBT community, resilience, and action, and I'm grateful to our presenters for sharing their time and expertise with us today. I'd like to introduce you to them now. First, we have Reverend Kim Jackson, whose pronouns are she, her, hers. Reverend Jackson is Candler School of Theology alumna, was recently named one of Emory's 2019 40 Under 40 winners, and currently serves as interim vicar at the Church of the Common Ground, our church on the streets of downtown Atlanta that intentionally strives to build community and care for the spiritual needs of the homeless. Jackson, the first Black LGBTQ+ person ordained as a priest in the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta, previously served as chaplain at the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing and the Atlanta University Center, and as an associate rector of All Saints Episcopal Church. She is currently running in the election for Georgia State Senate District 41. Next, we have DeAndre Miles Hercules, whose pronouns are they, them, theirs. DeAndre is a doctoral student in the Department of Linguistics at the University of California, Santa Barbara. They are originally from Prince George's County, Maryland, and obtained a BA in linguistics with minors in anthropology and African American studies from Emory University. Their research focuses on language as a nexus for the enactment of race, gender, and sexuality in the domains of sociality and power, specifically as it pertains to Black, femme, queer, and trans communities. DeAndre frames their academic and community activism as specifically anti-racist, sexist, queer transphobic, classist, ableist, and xenophobic. Mariah Moore, whose pronouns are she, her, hers, is the national organizer at Transgender Law Center. Her work includes fighting to ensure equity, equality, and safety for the transgender community, especially Black transgender women. Mariah has worked tirelessly in New Orleans to bring awareness to communities that have been adversely affected by laws and policies that are discriminatory. Mariah serves on the LGBTQ task force, which was created by New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell. She also works with the Cans Can't Stand campaign, which is a campaign that was created to bring awareness to and hopefully abolish the crimes against nature law that has historically targeted LGBTQ people of color and specifically Black transgender women. Mariah was also selected as a Victory Empowerment Fellow, which identifies LGBTQ community members who wish to run for office and provides campaign training. We may have one other panelist joining us in a little bit, but I do want to extend a huge thank you to everyone for participating in this important discussion today. Before we begin, many of you know that the discussion was originally slated to center violence against the LGBT community. While our community is so much more than what happens to us, we also need to recognize the epidemic of violence that is taking place, especially against Black transgender women. While some losses, such as Nina Pop and Tony McDade, have made a few headlines, many oftentimes do not. In the past month alone, we have lost 9 transgender and non-binary people to violence that we know of. One was only 17. I hope you'll take a moment to reflect with us as I read their names aloud before we move into this discussion. Dominique Remy Fells, Rhea Milton, Jane Thompson, Selena Reyes Hernandez, Brayla Stone, Mercy Mack, Shockey Peters, Bree Black, Summer Taylor. Thank you. I invite you to take a deep breath as we move into a discussion about LGBT community, resilience, and action. Recent events show us how important it is to come together as a community, but many of us agree that that's not always easy to find. So I'd like to ask our panelists, how have you gone about building communities that are relevant and impactful for you? And I'll start with Reverend Jackson.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Chloe. It's such an honor to be with just a wonderful group. I've met a number of you through some interesting ways of engaging with each other, and it feels a little bit like a family reunion. So I've had a hard time figuring out how to build community, and I feel like for me it's been kind of a trial and error along the way. But I've found my real niche in terms of finding community is to engage in issues that really matter to me, and then typically people who are excited about those issues, who are passionate about those issues, they have become my community. And so, here in Atlanta, I have a deep commitment to ending the death penalty in Georgia. That has been a longstanding commitment of mine. And as I work and engage more and more in that community, suddenly I have found over time, I've built relationships and real significant community with folks, many of whom are not LGBTQ and some of whom are. And I've also, Atlanta has the privilege of being kind of this Black gay Mecca. That's how we talk about Atlanta. And so, I've had the privilege of being able to go into spaces that were made for us as particularly Black queer women. And so there's some organizations that I go to, or there's some brunches that I'm able to spend some time with, and that's been really significant for me. And then particularly as a person of faith, finding a religious community that would receive me as a Black queer woman was really, really important. And it turns out that when you find those types of religious communities, typically there's someone else who looks like you and loves like you in those spaces. And so that's been I think a real beautiful source of community for me as well, centered around this commonality between being a person of faith who has really progressive views and ideas.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. DeAndre, I'd like to ask the same question of you. You've had the experience now of being on the East Coast and moving all the way to the West Coast. Have things been different in your travels?
Well, in some ways, yes. In some ways, no. I think community can often be found in really unexpected places. For me, community just means people who love and accept you as you come and support your goals and your growth, right? So these are people who invest in you, and you likewise invest in them, and you hold on really tightly to those people. And so, in terms of it being unexpected, when I was at Emory, one primary part of my community was Alpha. I was initiated into the Mu Alpha chapter of Alpha Alpha Training Incorporated when I was at Emory. And these people, unexpectedly, in some senses, are still some of my closest friends and loudest supporters, right? But also my day-to-day life, I ride with a lot of like Black, brown, queer, trans, and femme folks because we just look out for each other in certain ways, and those relationships sustain me as well. Kind of like Reverend Jackson was alluding, I also find myself in a lot of activist spaces with folks who care about many of the same issues I do. And we share certain kinds of experiences that may not be shared other folks in those other kinds of, I guess, groups that are all within my larger community. I don't necessarily think of myself moving around and forming multiple communities. I mean, my village is very large, right? It has lots of people. And so I think the commonality between all of these people, whether I'm in DC, whether I'm in Atlanta, whether I'm in Southern California, that common thread is going to be these people who invest in me and I mutually invest in, right? And we just support each other that way. I think that's what community means for me at this point.
I really like what you said about the investing in each other and being invested in. Mariah, has that been your experience in your community building as well? Oh, you're still on mute.
Can you hear me now? Perfect. I would just like to start off by naming that, yes, violence is happening to Black trans folks at disproportionate rates. But I would also like to name that Dawn Mason, a Black trans woman, is still missing. And she was potentially kidnapped in California. And I think it's very important to uplift and to recognize how Black women and Black kids are kidnapped. And hundreds of those of our community members are missing. And so I just want to uplift Dawn Mason, and I'm praying that she is well. And I think it's important in this time to spread that awareness about are missing, and hopefully we can find her safe and well. Community, my community, yes, has invested in me in more ways than one. But I think along with that, that came with a lot of work of me building up so that my community could re-pour into me the huge amount that I had given out, right? And so I benefited so much from the community that I built around me. You know, uplifting my siblings here in New Orleans, helping them to achieve long-term and short-term goals. But also, I think it's also important for me to recognize my siblings that are incarcerated in the communities that they build to protect themselves. Also, my migrant siblings who are detained in the communities that they build inside to protect themselves, and how we help protect them on the outside by advocating for them. And so my work in that regard is very intersectional, because I recognize the importance of not only the work that I'm doing for Black trans community, but my migrant community and my disability, my disabled community members, and my community members living with HIV, and my sex work community. Just realizing that I stand in the intersection of all those communities, and I'm committed to doing that work, because if I don't, then ultimately that will come right back around to directly affect me. And we see that with the death of the Shaky, our community member here who was murdered just a few days ago. I see that with Dominique Selves, a community member that was murdered a few weeks ago. You know, all that comes back to affect me, and it will ultimately affect our larger community in the long run. I just want to, I think it's important to, yes, we should definitely talk about joy, but I think a lot of times Black trans women and trans people who are facing violence are left to hold that trauma and pain alone. And so I just want everyone that's watching to know that you need to hold some of this grief and trauma and pain too, because you need to let that inform the ways in which you move and the ways in which you advocate for people who are more marginalized and who are facing these types of violence.
Thank you very much for that. You brought up a lot of important points. One of the things that I heard was, we often talk about community as a monolith in the LGBTQ community, or name a community, and it's not. There are multiple communities within that larger one. And you talked very importantly about people who are watching this, and people who are involved, and people who want to be involved, to hold some of that trauma, to be able to work through this as well. So we have to move through a lot of communities. We talk about our communities, but we have to move through other ones. You know, for me, when I was first coming out, it was just going outside. What do you find in communities that make you feel more welcome in places that you have to move through? And I'll go back for a moment to Reverend Kim Jackson on that one.
Yeah, so we move through different spaces because we have to, right? So work is a different space for some of us than home is, than family is, and than friends are, than our chosen family. And certainly for me, I found myself having to decide, am I going to come out? So the process of coming out is an over and over again process, you know, like I told my parents, I don't know, a decade ago, but every time, you know, I go to every time I go to a new event, I have to decide. And part of the calculation that I make in that decision is, does this feel like it's going to be a safe place? And there's spaces where that's not the case. I think when I think about what are the elements that have made those spaces feel more safe, it's when people choose to use language that lets me know that they recognize that there might be somebody else there who is not heteronormative. So when people open a space and say, like, what are your pronouns? That lets me know right then, oh, they're at least thinking about the fact that we're not all binary people, right? That means they are aware that some of us are trans. And, when people introduce themselves and when they talk about their siblings. So I'm in a religious space a lot, and I'm in a Black church religious setting where we talk about brothers and sisters all the time. And every time I go to a space where the pastor or whoever is talking instead chooses to use the language of sibling, then I hear that and I know this might be an okay space. And it's a choice that I feel like I'm constantly making of how much of a risk do I want to take. And in some spaces where I don't hear those cues of hey, this is going to be a safe place. We asked you your pronouns, or we acknowledge that some people have, two mommies or two daddies or one mom, when I'm not in those spaces, I have to make the choice. And sometimes it requires a certain amount of courage, right? It requires some courage to just say hey, I'm queer or I'm a lesbian and this matters. And, if I have kids, they're not going to have a mom and dad, and that doesn't make our family less valuable. So I'm going to speak up about that. And I'll admit there's some times where that just does not feel safe. And it's also just not worth the energy. I think particularly as a Black woman, I carry a lot. The Black community carries a lot. I think a lot of the grief of the community often falls on Black women. And so we have to choose the times when we're gonna fight the battle and say, hey, make space for me, and the times when we're not, because we're already working so hard. So, but I do think that those verbal cues are really important to me in terms of giving me the cues that it's okay to be out, that this is a space where people are gonna welcome me.
Thank you. And I want to hold on to that notion of language and come back to it. DeAndre, do you see language as an indicator of safety when you're looking at communities that may be more or less inclusive?
Well, I mean, yes and no. Everything's a yes and no for me. I think in terms of being in community or whether or not I feel welcome in community, I don't think that I really make a distinction, between moving between spaces, because I am who I am in all the spaces I go to, right? I look how I look, I present how I present, queer as a $3 bill, right? And so people know this when I walk in the door, and there's nothing that I could or would want to do about that per se. And so I agree with Reverend Jackson in saying that language can be a part of it. And sometimes it's affirming language in terms of people saying, hey, I see you, I recognize you, by using some of these terms, some of this coded language. But I also feel put at ease when I see other folks checking their own privileges in terms of their positionality in the space, right? So they don't necessarily have to be orienting to me, right? But if, I can see that there's a man in the space who is, being cognizant of not taking up too much verbal or physical space, right? And just seeing that someone is being aware of that, or, white people, for instance, being aware of taking up too much verbal space. And I also, in terms of encouraging folks, which is to be aware of and reflect on this critically, but don't do too much, right? This can go easily left, right? There are a lot of people who know that this is a thing that, queer and trans folks in particular orient to. And so they might say this thing, I, as a cis person, this is me checking my privilege, right? Or, I, as a straight woman, whatever, right? And so I think there are some ways in which that language or, reflectiveness about language can really help and make me feel not necessarily welcome, but you're not going to try and bring harm to me actively, right? And that's always a nice signal to have. But if folks aren't being critical enough, that also can just irritate me, to be honest, and make me not want to hear you talk anymore. So yeah, folks should be very, very critical, I guess.
So it's a self-examination as well as verbal cues, as well as nonverbal cues. I hear you on the taking up too much space, and I want to move the question over to Mariah. Are there cues? Are there things that make you feel more safe? And I realize that safe and included are very different things, But then do you feel more safe or included in different spaces that you have to move through on a daily basis?
No, no space I ever go into, I never have like these things that I say, okay, if this is happening, it makes me feel safe, or this is a environment that makes me feel safe, because of what we've been through, because of what I've been through as a Black trans woman, and I automatically assume that no space is safe. And because typically every space that we enter, something happens that reminds us that these spaces are not completely safe for us. Even spaces that were created for us, that were for some time ran by us, that are now being infiltrated by other folks, which make it unsafe. That's one example, like, so no. And I think that's why, for me, I have developed over time a huge presence when I walk into a room. Like I carry this huge presence, and I give off this very strong persona, because that's one of the things that I do as a defense mechanism to let people know, like, don't play with me, don't mess with me. I'm not one. I'm just don't even go there with, like, and that's what that's what I've had to do as a woman in the South, right? And so, and being a leader, and even for women who aren't or consider themselves leaders, you are, because as Black women specifically, we automatically go into the unknown, and we lay the foundation for our future generations to follow. My elders were constantly put in violent, dangerous settings and situations everywhere they went, so that now I won't be so much at risk. And the acceptance and the tolerance, which I hate the word tolerance, but so be it, it's there now, right? So we can kind of comfortably go to the grocery store, right, without being attacked. We can kind of comfortably go to the store, a clothing store, to get our clothing without feeling like someone is going to attack us, right? But there are other things that we can't do. You don't go walking by yourself at night. Don't allow a man to approach you in public, because there is a chance that could go horribly wrong. You don't go in large gatherings by yourself, especially during certain times where you don't have people that are with you there to help protect you, because you never know what will happen. So no space, even in professional settings, when we go to these large conferences and, that are supposed to be for us, and the way that we're policed and all of these different things, like no space is ever really truly safe for, I'm not just Black people, but people of color, people that are differently abled. Like I touch on that again, like people who have different access needs, no space is safe. I mean, it's just, it's frustrating.
I definitely hear the frustration and empathize that as much as I can. You touched on a lot of different things there about how you carry yourself, how you make your presence known. And I'm thinking about people who may be watching, who are kind of coming into their own and figuring out their identity and figuring out language. And language is power. And I was thinking, about a question along the lines of, how do you choose to identify yourself? But I think more importantly, especially for people who are just coming out, do you ever feel like you have to identify yourself differently depending on communities that you're in, or act differently depending on communities that you're in? Because I don't think many people outside of this experience necessarily understand that. And I'd like to go to DeAndre first.
Ooh, you're asking the tough questions now. So identity for me is tricky. And I think a part of it's intersectionality, a part of it's I'm a bit of a pessimist, but identity itself doesn't do a lot of work for me these days. It's not something that I invest a lot of time and thought into, for a couple of reasons. One, like I said, my identity kind of is with me when I walk in the door, right? I don't necessarily need to tell someone that I belong to, different kinds of groups, whether that's being queer, transgender, non-conforming, Black, all these things is kind of etched on my body, right? But the other thing is that, and I do say this as a linguist, that language doesn't exist to describe the full extent of my life, my experience. And I think that's really true of a lot of folks like me, queer, trans femmes, Black and brown folks. And so I think on the one hand, thinking about identity in terms of language isn't always that useful. That being said, don't get ahead of me. That does not mean that, folks can now be loose with the language, particularly regarding queer and trans folks. So I think for like queer and trans folks who are watching, right, it can be important to come up with the language if you don't already have it, if it doesn't already exist, to describe what you're feeling, how you think about yourself. And, it's important to, take point from folks who are paving those roads, folks who have done a lot of that work, and, see the ways that you relate to them. Maybe they created some of that language, and maybe they did that for you, right? And so I think identity can be important as a linguistic imperative, but it's not the only thing. And I think in terms of folks who want to be responsible, or folks who want to be allies, folks who really should be accomplices, right? Folks who should be putting skin in the game, right? If you actually want to do something, even passively, listen first and foremost, right? Because y'all sitting around in corners like, oh my God, what are their pronouns? I just don't know. Listen how other people are talking about their identities. How is someone close to this person using their pronouns? You miss all of that information when you worried about yourself, because, and this goes for many different kinds of people, you more worried about someone calling you a transphobe than being a transphobe. People more worried about being called a racist than actually being racist. So listen for one, and then speak up, right? So this is like dialogue, right? So you have a place, right? This again is for people who are outside of communities, who also want to do some of this linguistic work, right? You have a voice that you can use without getting you killed, probably. So like Mariah said, you got to hold some of that violence and that trauma too. And that's what being an accomplice looks like, right? So supporting folks when they decide what their pronouns are, right? If their shitty parent is really aggressively not going to use them, right? So maybe you do. Or, in these kinds of situations, maybe in public, at the grocery store, I don't know, just in these day-to-day experiences can mean a lot to people, right? And so, yeah, even if identity isn't doing, necessarily the same thing for me always, as someone who, one walks in my identity in a particular kind of way, but also someone who has all these other things going on in terms of intersectionality that are meaning that, there isn't anything I could say that's going to keep someone from, trying to pour gasoline on me in the street, right? It doesn't matter if I tell you I'm gender nonconforming, I tell you I'm non-binary or trans femme or whatever, it doesn't always make a bunch of a difference to me. That being said, I think folks in the community should be reflexive about the language that you need for your own, personal sake and satisfaction. And then folks who are outside of the community should think about the ways that they can use language as a resource to support us.
Thank you very much for that. And both you and Mariah hit on something that I really want to underscore for the audience, is that these aren't worst case scenarios that you're talking about when I'm nervous about going to the grocery store. These aren't worst case scenarios when you're talking about I'm nervous to go to a large gathering. This is just the experience. And these are the things that happen. You both also referenced something that kind of early on in your statements that I want to go back to, is the people that came before you and how they've impacted your life, and what that's been like for you. And I want to go back to Mariah on this one. What has having those forebears done for you, and what do you hope to leave for the people coming behind you?
I just did an oral history project for the University of Minnesota yesterday, and that's one of the same questions that they asked me, and I told them that, you know, for me, it was the women that I saw from afar as a kid, as I was running in the French Quarter, that I've never met again, or never been able to put a name with their face, that was out there doing sex work and surviving. And little did I know, paving the way for my existence long before I even had the words to put with my identity. So I pay homage to all of those women who have been surviving. Who have been surviving and fearlessly doing it. One woman who has inspired me and who has always poured into me is Opal Wiley, who is an amazing woman and an elder here in New Orleans, who has shown me how to live and how to be proud of who I am and how to own my beauty. And I'm beautiful in so many different ways than one, not just my physical beauty, but also my inner beauty, and the ways in which I help people and I care for people is so beautiful, and that, you know, that affects my future generations by the work that I'm doing, you know. But then I also think about my historical figures and elders like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, and Miss Major, and you know, just folks in movement that have, you know, framed this moment that we're in, framed this time that we're in, and allowed me to continue to build that frame, you know, to add on to what they've already laid, you know. And even though it seems like this is the worst of times that we're living in, because there's so much death and so many things that are being taken away from us, you know, I look back and I'm so grateful for them. I'm so grateful that I'm allowed to stand in that number with them, and I'm allowed to continue to forge a path forward for our future generations. And I take on a lot of their words, and I take on a lot of their missions and values, because I believe that, and I still stand firm in this, my work does not consist of pride, right? Every image, every time we use Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera to recreate Pride every year, it's not truly done in their name, because Pride was not who they were or what they wanted, and that work is not done, right? And so we'll never truly be able to honor their legacy and memory at an event such as Pride until we're all free, because that's what they were, freedom fighters, and they were fighting to liberate the most marginalized of this trans community specifically, because guess what? They already liberated the gays, the white gays, honey. They already liberated the white lesbians, honey. You know what I'm saying? Come on. But now, since you have your little piece of liberation and you moved a little bit forward, you threw them away. You threw that legacy away, and you used their names and legacies in vain. So yes, those are the people that pour into me. Those are the people in my local community who I draw my strength from. And when I want to give up and I don't want to get out of the bed in the morning because I see another woman from my local community or my larger community has been taken away prematurely, I draw my strength from them. I draw my strength from the little trans kid somewhere in rural America that is looking at a magazine or looking now at Netflix, watching Disclosure, saying, oh my goodness, this is who I am and I want to find my tribe. You know, I'm doing that for them, you know, creating a forever home for our community. So if they need to run away from violence, they have somewhere to go. So, yeah.
Thank you. I see a lot of heads nodding along with this. And I want to pose the same question to Reverend Jackson. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just amening Mariah all the way. I've been talking a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement and the fight against police brutality and so much. I mean, what was happening at Stonewall, that was police brutality, and they fought back. And as I go out on the streets of Atlanta and try to serve as a clergy presence with my siblings who are fighting back, I feel like they are the ones who are actually carrying on the legacy, much so more than the rainbow flags do. So, I've also thought a lot about. There's so many people who came before me who made it possible for me to follow my calling as a clergy person. And I think, so Mariah, you have some people that when you feel down about, you can kind of, you think about them and that empowers you, so Pauli Murray is that person for me. Pauli Murray was an African-American, non-binary, queer attorney, Episcopal priest, who did the work. Like she did the work, and I draw strength and inspiration from her, and I know that I am a priest today because I stand on her shoulders, and so many others. I have been called to a profession that is predominantly male and predominantly white, and so every time I step behind an altar, I am mindful of the women, both white and Black, and people of color. And I'm mindful of so many LGBTQ folks, many of whom could not be out, but who stood behind those altars or who got in conferences and pressed people. I think that, let's talk about the power of privilege that that heteronormative folks have, and it's to really use their voices in the spaces where we're not welcome. And so every time I think about, so when I'm elected in November, I will be the first out LGBT senator the state of Georgia's ever seen, the first one. But I stand on the shoulders of so many people who've gone before me in other states, but I also stand on the shoulder of people who sat around my majority Black district, went and talked to the Black grandmamas and said, I don't care who she's sleeping with, she cares about us. And so those folks, I stand on their shoulders, right? Like they open the pathways for me. And so I feel like I am surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, of ancestors who came before me, of people who are living their lives, who are being themselves right now, who help make my life possible and help make my life have meaning. And the final thing that I'll say is I too, Mariah, like I find so much hope in thinking about the little queer Black kids who get to read the like random articles that come out about me and other people who look like us and love like us. And I didn't have that when I was growing up in Cowpen, South Carolina. And I'm so glad that we get to be a model and get to create a space and say, baby, there's a place for you in this world. There's room for you in the table, just as you are. That gives me so much hope and gives me so much desire to just keep pushing on.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And DeAndre, I want to give you an opportunity to respond as well.
Wow, this is bringing me so much joy, y'all. But I echo those sentiments, right? I, like everybody else, stands on the shoulders of giants, right? And this goes back to people like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera. I gave a couple of interviews in the past few weeks, and every time, so people are asking me a lot about people of color. What do I think about this term? Which I can't roll my eyes enough, but that's besides the point. When I'm talking about where terms like people of color are really useful, I think about STAR, right? The Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries that Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera founded in 1970, right? This is a coalition for all, like Black, brown, queer, trans, right? All of the dispossessed, right? That's what we were working for on the side of justice, right? And so this is the kind of legacy that we come from. But even further back than that, I wonder, going even further back to Jim Crow, to the antebellum period, right? What were my ancestors doing then? We didn't just pop on the scene today or yesterday, right? So what were those experiences like, right? And when I think about those stories that we don't know, I think about how I'm riding for them. Like, I'm gonna do it big for them, right? Even if they didn't necessarily get to, right? And so, we stand on the shoulders of giants, but I'm pretty tall too. I stand about 6'3", 6'4", so hey. So I'm trying to pay it forward as well. Like they were saying, I get a lot of joy when I see, other folks who I can see it in their eyes that they have never seen anybody like me just in public, right? And they just don't know what to do with themselves. But I can see that they see that now they could too. I remember this was a year or two ago. I was sitting in a brunch spot in South Carolina somewhere. It was in Columbia, somewhere in Columbia, South Carolina. And this parent was kind of like nudging their child over to me. The child was kind of sheepishly like looking away. Child finally comes over to tell me that they liked my hair. I had like a pink fro going on, but that they really liked it and that they wanted to dye their hair too. This child couldn't have been more than 7 years old. I said, oh shit, bless your heart, right? But for me, it's just that, these images that I didn't necessarily have as a child, if I can be that image for someone else, it means the world to me. I'm an educator by trade, and it's not lost on me that pretty much all of the students I will ever have will, one, have not ever had before and will never have again an educator like me, someone who is Black, who is queer, who is trans, who's very open about it, right? And is not shy and not hiding from anybody in that sense. And they tell me, time and time again, how much it means for them to be in my class, how much it means for them not even to be in my class, but to see me teach in somebody else's class, right? And for me, that is what keeps me in the game. That's what keeps me being an educator, right? As much as I love, scholarship and books and all that great stuff. I think the ways that I can pay it forward in terms of my community is one of the most important things for me.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And I'm hearing a lot of great things and how important it is to look to the people who have paved the way, but also realizing that you're paving the way as we're going along too. And I hear it often said to people in our community, you're so brave. And that they're acknowledging we're brave for existing. And I know that this is meant as a compliment, but it's also a recognition and an inherent condemnation of how our society views and treats people in the LGBT community sometimes. So how do you find rejuvenation? What lifts you up? Knowing that we're wearing this chain armor of forced bravery, when you can take that off, what lifts you up? And I'll go back to Reverend Jackson first on this one.
Yeah, so there's so much that I think helps sustain me. We talked about that cloud of witnesses, those ancestors. I think I come from a religious tradition in which I believe that the ancestors are with us and that they are rooting for us and praying us through. And so I certainly find them to be a source. But also I live on a farm. My wife and I have a little hobby farm with goats and chickens, and I have to touch the ground. There's just something about the groundedness that reminds me of how I am connected to something so much greater than me. And that's helpful. I like to laugh. This stuff is hard. Like living our true selves. And I think this is why people call us brave, because a lot of people don't feel like they can do it. Like living your true self as non-gender conforming, queer, whatever that is not considered the standard. It's hard. And so I have had to be really intentional about being in spaces and being with people where I don't have to be any of that for anybody. Like I get to be like just Kim. I ain't Reverend Kim. I ain't Senator-elect Kim. I'm just Kim. And I can eat good food. I think that's really, really important, right? Is eating good food and laughing and just being. And on the other side of that, I've also found that my strength comes from also being with someone that I can also weep with and grieve with. This stuff is hard. It really is. And so having a spouse, having a lover who is just as ready and just as quick to laugh with me as she is to cry with me is so essential to my own well-being. And also feeling like I get to create religious communities in which we can do the same thing, where we can be with each other, grieve and celebrate. Those are the things that really ground me and help me have resilience in the midst of, and what's really, quite frankly, a very difficult world to live in.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Mariah, I'd love to give you an opportunity to respond as well.
I think that self-care, therapy, that's something that is so, it's hard to navigate for a lot of Black people, period, right? I don't get to work through my trauma and grief, and I tend to hold that in a lot because we need therapy, right? I need that desperately, but the risk that I run of running into someone who will further harm me is greater than someone who will actually help me. And so while I take trips and I go shopping and I go hang out with friends and have a cocktail every now and then, none of that truly helps me to restore and to recharge and to regain everything that I'm putting out, the pieces of myself that I'm exhausting to do this work, because I'm not truly working through and unpacking that trauma and that grief that I'm holding. One, because I'm afraid to, and two, because there aren't enough competent professionals to help me work through that grief, pain, and trauma without further traumatizing me. And so that's very hard. So I think about things I do for fun, but I don't know if that's necessarily an answer about how I recharge and restore my capacity for this work. I think I just keep extending it, and I just keep going, right? Because I know it's something that I have to do. But I mean, for fun, I like a cocktail. I'm from New Orleans. I love to eat. I love food. I love to cook. I do that a lot. But I also cry a lot. And, for a long time, I used to cry in public because I didn't know, where all of this pain was coming from. But until I started doing this work, I was always ashamed of that. And so now part of me crying is releasing a little bit of it, still not addressing it completely, but it's allowing me to release some of the pain that I'm feeling. So I cry a lot. I cry with people. I cry alone. I cry, and I find that as a way of also memorializing the feelings that I have for my sister, siblings, and community members that are experiencing so much more than I am in this moment. So yeah.
I know one thing I do know about you is that you do keep pushing and you do keep doing the work, and I appreciate the work that you do, and I hope that you can find some solace as well. DeAndre, I'd love to give you the opportunity to respond as well.
Yeah, so I always think this is the most interesting thing. People come up to me, they put their hand on my shoulder like their grandmother, just that, oh, you're so brave. You're so brave. And, at base, I'm like, if you don't get away from me. But really, I'm like, no, I'm just doing me, right? I'm not brave in that sense. Brave is these Tuesday trim supercuts haircuts that folks are risking coronavirus to get. Now, that's brave. I wouldn't be caught dead with one of these $10 haircuts. But what people mean to say when they say brave is that they included, and most else of the world isn't really doing anything to protect me from all kinds of heinous violence, right? And that by me, living my truth and putting myself out there, then I'm putting myself in danger. Or, you know, some people would even say asking for all kinds of violence to be heaped upon me. And they say that that's brave, which again, I think is a ridiculous thing to say to anybody. But I will say that, you know, being myself is the fun part, right? So as many challenges and dangers come our way, like I can say personally that I feel freest when my braids swing, my laugh is loud. And I know that people hate to see it. I know they do, they cry about it. And, you know, I distill the salt out of those tears and I use it to season my chicken, okay? I just, you know, try my best to be unbothered, right? And it becomes easier as time goes on. But it's also the case that I don't do any of this alone. Like me and the folks I ride with, we restore and rejuvenate each other, right? We hold each other in the absence of these institutional resources. Like Mariah said, you know, we don't have ready access to therapy where I come from. And even if we did have ready access, there's so much stigmatization about mental health anyway, you still would be shamed for going out to seek it, right? And so we really have to hold each other, or we do. And so I know that, you know, that I can feel my feelings and I'm intentional about being my own biggest cheerleader, even when it's not easy. But I also make it a point to extend myself to others in that same way, because I know, like, you know, if everybody else is good, I'm good too, right? You know, we say if the family's eating, then everything's good, right? And so I think that, you know, self-love is something, one of the few things that you can curate for free, that you can just, you know, really kind of curate and meditate on your own, but also extending that practice and that graciousness and that love to other folks in the community can, you know, help us all do a little bit better.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I'm hesitant to ask this next question, and I'm not going to ask anybody specific to answer it because I feel like you may feel that you've answered it a million times before, but part of what we're talking about today is action. And I'm thinking more along the lines of organizational action and what organizations that are actively seeking to be more inclusive can do to to be more inclusive. And I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but if anybody wants to answer it, please go ahead. And if not, I will move on to the next question.
You can hire Black trans people. You can consider lived experience as well when hiring for positions, because we know not every position that you're hiring for requires all those silly requirements that you put on those job descriptions, right? Like, come on now. Like, it doesn't take all that all the time. Attend you some trainings, and if you don't, if you can't find a larger training model anywhere, then you bring someone in and you pay them to do that training. Pay folks for their expertise. Don't do a diversity training and then hire a white person to do it. Do a diversity training and hire a person of color or a Black person to do it. Don't do a training about pronouns and hire a non-trans person to do it. Do a training about people who are trans and hire a trans person to do that training, right? Be intentional and forward-facing about the things that you're doing to make your organization more inclusive, right? But also stand strong in that and do things and send messages that are tangible that people can see the changes that are being made. They can feel it, that make them want to be a part of your organization, make them want to support your organization, not just see hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Black Trans Lives Matter, hashtag only during Pride Month, and then July 1st, we won't see you again until the next year for 30 more days. Like, no, be sincere and intentional about what you're doing and do it year round. Make it a part of your mission and your vision, truly, but also make it reflect on your payroll.
Yeah, I want to just like jump onto that. Like, you got to look at your own organization and make sure your stuff is right. And so if you got, if you have, let me speak white speak, if you have wage disparities in your organization, you need to address those. And I'm going to be bold here and say, if you've hired Black people or people of color to essentially diversify and be Black on staff for you, then you need to pay them for that. You need to pay them. Like, it takes energy. It is extra when you are one or two of Black people of a whole corporation or organization and everybody else is white. The Black person is working a hell of a lot harder. Let me be clear about that, just by virtue of being Black, and you need to compensate them for that. So get your stuff in your own organization right before you send out a lovely hashtag or IG about how you all down for the cause. I want you to open your books and talk about how you're paying people. Are you paying them right? And then when you open your books, and are you hiring people who look differently than you? Are you hiring people that represent the larger, broader community who bring in broader experiences? If you're doing that, open your books, show us, and then we can get behind you and we can promote you.
Wow, y'all are the bomb. I'm really glad to be on a panel with y'all. I'm honored. And so I can only reiterate that point, right? Come up off them coins, okay? It's very simple, right? And it's not that, what you can do right now, right? You can just go over back to your browser and click new tab and go to marshallp.org/donate. Donate to the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, right? And there are a number of other like Black and trans-led organizations you can find just by asking the wise sister Google. She's very smart. She will lead you to all the right resources, right? But so one of the things that bothers me at this point is people still, right, throwing up their hands up, well, I don't know, who should I donate to? Where are the organizations? Which tells me that you didn't even Google it, which means that you're just paying lip service, right? So put your money where your fingers are and go get on your keyboard and go find an organization or an institution to support. But in the same way, Reverend Jackson and Mariah have said, this is like interpersonal too, right? So don't bring Black and brown and trans folks to come do your diversity panels and don't pay us, right? That's labor. Find out what an honorarium is, and then you go find out how to secure one. That's one. Two is the same thing, right? When you have folks in terms of your own organizations internally, right? A lot of us get sequestered into doing this work that gets called service, right? So what you have to do is find out for your organization, how does that service now become fit under the job descriptions that is actually in that salary pay, right? Figure out how folks are being compensated for the labor that we're doing, at which point we tell you that this is work that we're doing, right? Rather than responding with, oh, well, I thought you'd be happy to, or, it just seems so easy for you. You do it so flawlessly. You're so brave, right? Instead of doing any of that, just pay us. And that won't solve all of the issues. That will solve one of the issues, for instance, in terms of employment and access to financial resources, not to mention, equitable access to housing and medicine and all these other things. But this is one thing that you can do from the comfort of your own couch. And then you can go back to watching Netflix or whatever else you were doing. But that's one small step that you can do, one, like at the institutional level and at the interpersonal one.
Thank you.
I just want to add one quick thing to everything Yandre just said. Yes, donate to organizations who are doing work, but please also don't donate to organizations who are giving direct services to communities. Donate to, let me say this again, donate to organizations who are giving direct services to communities. Before you donate to one of these big national organizations, because yes, national organizations need support too, but if you can support national, you can support local as well. Find a local organization, and local doesn't just mean in your municipality or in your, city, maybe in your state. Find an organization that is giving direct services. We have seen so many people in need during this pandemic, And there are not enough organizations being supported that are providing direct services. And when I say direct services, I mean rental assistance, I mean assistance with bills, assistance with food stipends, assistance with rideshare programs. We need them. Our communities need them to keep them safe and to keep them COVID free right now. And so just please, just look into that. That's all I want to add.
Thank you very much. Those are all great points, and I appreciate you taking the time to share them with us too. We do have one question that came in from the audience so far, and if you're part of the audience and you have a question, please feel free to type it in and we'll try to get them. And this one comes from a pediatric resident, and wants to talk about what makes you feel safe in a healthcare community or situation, especially during childhood or adolescence. Is there anybody who would like to tackle that question? A lot of what we talked about, people don't feel safe.
You can hire me and I can bring you in, bring my expertise in, and I can heal y'all up on that, but I'm not answering that question on this live.
Okay. Thank you very much. And it looks like we are about at time. So I do want to give a huge thank you to the panelists again. Thank you so much for sharing your time, for sharing your expertise, for sharing your knowledge. I think there's a lot of brilliance and excellence on this panel, and it really showed through today. So thank you very much. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to Emory for putting this on. And I look forward to seeing many of you again soon. Thank you.